In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had this Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." And Abram agreed to what Sarah had said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. And he slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. And then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." And then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" "I am running away from my mistress Sarai," she said. And then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." And the angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." And the angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son, and you shall name him Ishmael. For the Lord has heard of your misery, and he will be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility towards all his brothers." And she gave this name to the Lord, who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well was called Bir Lahai Roya. And it is still there between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. And of course, this was Genesis 16. Oh boy, did this start some shit.
The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey, I'm John Towers. This is the Abracast. I want to take a second to thank you guys so much for listening to the show. It's whenever I think about it, it's always so weird that well, I guess it's not weird anymore, but it feels weird occasionally that so many people invite me into their days, to talk shit about this weird stuff and to tell crazy stories and whatever. And I just want to say thank you so much to everybody. And with that being said, I got a good one tonight. We're continuing on our Genesis business. So at the end of the cold open, I was like, this started a lot of shit. And the reason I said that is because, it might be a topic for a whole nother episode, because we do have a lot to get through tonight, but Ishmael is associated by Muhammad himself with Islam. I think Muhammad claims to be a descendant of Ishmael, but Ishmael is also linked to Mecca, and he is linked to the construction of the Kaaba. If you don't know what the Kaaba is, it's that weird, cube in Mecca that the Muslims, mosh pit around. They all, travel around in a circle around it all the time. It's weird. I mean, it's weird watching it. But and there's this meteor that's in this silver cup or something bolted to the side of it, and they're all supposed to kiss it or something. Anyhow, it's the reason. I mean, it's the reason that the Hajj is a thing. Anyhow, so we're just going to get into it. We will get into this episode. The featured books for this evening are Ginsberg's Legends of the Jews and, of course, the Bible. You could check it in your Bible. If you're playing along at home, now is the time where I would like you to take your vessel of the art, and I'd like you to adhere to the formula for your weapon of mass distraction. I am, as usual, 98% of the time, I have a jinn jihad mixed up in my vessel of the art, and I'd like you to raise it to the sky and join me in thanking my Patreon and Subscribestar supporters. Thank you guys for supporting the show. I appreciate that. So we're going to be talking about sacrifice tonight. Sacrifice and a little blessing. The eldest son is supposed to be the one that is blessed and have the inheritance and the divine birthright. And since we have been talking about Genesis, I have been noticing and calling out these instances. I believe it's a theme that the wrong son gets blessed. And I think tonight we're going to see an important link in this idea. This isn't a shtick. I'm not, this is an uninformed or unformed idea I'm working on as I go. But if you go back to those early Genesis episodes and some of those Freemason episodes, you'll hear me kind of stumble upon this and be like, hey, wait a minute, I think there might be something here. So we're going to touch on that again tonight. Genesis 17. This is the covenant of circumcision. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. It seems to me in these early things where God's always talking about increasing everybody's progeny and stuff, it's like they're playing a game of Sin City. God's playing a game of Sim City up there. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, as for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations, and I will make you very fruitful. and I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of the descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. And then God said to Abraham, as for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you, for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you for the generations to come after. Male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born to your household or bought with money from a foreigner. Those who are not your offspring, whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant is with your flesh, is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people, and he has broken my covenant. God also said to Abraham, and for Sarai, your wife, you are to no longer call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah, and I will bless her and surely give you a son by her. And I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her. So, nations will be built on this foundation of loose dick skin. Abraham fell face down, and he laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. And then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will increase his numbers, and he will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. And when he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him. On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael, and those born to his household or bought with his money, and every male in his household, and he circumcised them as God told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised on that very day. And every male in Abraham's household, including those born in his household or bought from a foreigner, was circumcised with him. The birth of Isaac, Genesis 21. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age. And at the very time God had promised him, Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and anyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham and Sarah would nurse children, and yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and move to Legends of the Jews by Ginsberg, the journey to Moriah. And the Lord thought to try Abraham and Isaac in this matter, and he said to Abraham, take now thy son. And Abraham said, I have 2 sons, and I do not know which one of them thou commandest me to take. And God, who's like a gangster right here, goes, thine only son. Abraham, the one is the only son of his mother, and the other is the only son of his mother. And God said, whom thou lovest, I love this one, and I love that one. Even Isaac dropped the hammer. Abraham said, where shall I go? And God said, to the land I will show thee, and offer Isaac there for burnt offering. This is the shit that gives me a complex. Generally on Father's Day, I post a picture of the Abraham Isaac, one of the Abraham Isaac paintings. Abraham says, am I fit to perform a sacrifice? Am I a priest? Ought not rather the high priest Shem to do it? And God says, when thou wilt arrive at that place, I will consecrate thee and make thee a priest. Abraham said within himself, how shall I separate my son Isaac from Sarah, his mother? And he came into the tent, and he sat before Sarah, his wife, and spake these words to her. My son Isaac is grown up, and he has not yet studied the service of God. Now, tomorrow I will go and bring him to Shem and Eber, his son. Shem is a son of Noah, by the way, just to put it in a little bit of context. If, this might be interesting. Last month's Fulgor Correspondentia, I did an infographic on a brief timeline of Genesis to help keep everybody straight on these stories, since I kind of did them out of order a little bit. So if you're interested in that, you can go check out, sign up for the mailing list, join the degree of the Fulgor Correspondentia, and check out this infographic of the brief timeline of Genesis. Anyhow, and there he will learn the ways of the Lord, for they will teach him to know the Lord and to know how to pray unto the Lord, that he may answer him, and to know the way of serving the Lord his God. And Sarah said, thou hast spoken well. Go, my Lord, and do unto him as thou hast said, but remove him not far from me. Neither let him remain there too long, for my soul is bound within his soul. And Abraham said unto Sarah, my daughter, let us pray to the Lord our God, that he may do some good with us. And Sarah took her son Isaac, and he abode with her all that night, and she kissed and embraced him, and she laid injunctions upon him until the morning. And she said to Abraham, O my Lord, I pray thee, take heed of thy son, and place thine eyes over him. For I have no other son nor daughter but him. Oh, neglect him not. If he be hungry, give him bread. And if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. But do not let him go on foot, neither let him sit in the sun, neither let him go by himself on the road, neither turn him from whatever he may desire. But do unto him as he may say to thee. And after spending the whole night in weeping on account of Isaac, she got up in the morning, selected a very fine and beautiful garment from those that Abimelech had given to her, and she dressed Isaac therewith. And she put a turban upon his head, and she fashioned a precious stone on the top of the turban, and she gave them provisions for the road. I need a drink to that. Provisions. And Sarah went out with them, and she accompanied them upon the road to see them off. And they said to her, return to the tent. And when Sarah heard these words of her son Isaac, she wept bitterly. And Abraham wept with her, and their son wept with them. A great weeping also those of their servants who went with them wept greatly. And Sarah caught a hold of Isaac, and she held him in her arms. And she embraced him and continued to weep with him. And Sarah said, who knoweth if I shall ever see thee again after this day? So I think there's something to be said here about meeting with God and surviving, right? I mean, it's something, Indiana Jones fans could certainly, the good one. All right, so there's two good ones. But it seems like she understands. I don't know. It's not clear that she understands that he's going to be sacrificed, but it's clear that he's going to be initiated into some kind of priesthood. And you're like, if you're that close to this God, I'm not sure if you're going to make it out alive. And back to the book. Abraham departed with Isaac amid great weeping, and while Sarah and the servants returned to the tent, he took two of the young men with him, Ishmael and Eliezer. And while they were walking on the road, the young men spoke these words to each other. Said Ishmael to Eliezer, now my father Abraham is going with Isaac to bring him up for a burnt offering to the Lord. So obviously, at least somebody knew what was going on. And when he returneth, he will give unto me all that he possesses to inherit after him. For I am his firstborn. Eliezer answered, surely Abraham did cast thee off with my mother, and swear that thou shouldest not inherit anything of all he possesses, but to whom he will give all that he has, all his precious things. But unto his servant, who has been faithful to his house, to me, who have served him night and day, and have done all that he desired me. The Holy Spirit answered, neither this one nor that one will inherit Abram. So this is also a thing that we talk about on the show whenever we run into it, which is whenever we do these Genesis stories, is that the wrong son seems to be blessed. And we're going to get this actually kind of twofold by the end of this Isaac story when we get into Jacob. If I were to say which wrong son gets blessed, people would say, well, Jacob gets blessed, and it was it was Isaac that should have been blessed. Well, I don't know. I mean, here theoretically we're looking at the situation where Ishmael should have been blessed over Isaac, and Isaac would have been blessed over Jacob, but Jacob wound up getting it. And I mean, he got it good. Jacob fought with the fucking angel for like 12 hours. You know? I mean, that's why he got renamed and all that stuff. I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to it. While Abraham and Isaac were proceeding along the road. Oh, here we come. It gets dicey. Satan came and appeared to Abraham in a figure of a very aged man, humble and of contrite spirit, and said of him, Art thou silly or foolish? Thou art goeth to do this thing to thine only son, and God gave thee son in thy later days, in thine old age, and thou wilt go and slaughter him, who did not commit any violence. And wilt thou cause the soul of thine only son to perish from the earth? Dost thou not know and understand that this thing cannot be from the Lord? For the Lord would not do unto men such evil, and command him, Go and slaughter thy son. Abraham, hearing these words, knew that it was Satan who endeavored to turn him astray and from the way of the Lord, and he rebuked him. Then he went away, and Satan returned and came to Isaac, and he appeared unto him in figure of a young man, comely and well favored, and said unto him, Dost thou not know of thy silly old father bringeth thee to the slaughter this day for naught? Now, my son, do not listen to him, for he is a silly old man. And let not thy precious soul and beautiful figure be lost from this earth. And Isaac told these words to his father, but Abraham said unto him, Take heed of him, but do not listen to his words, for he is Satan, endeavoring to lead us astray from the commands of our God. And Abraham rebuked Satan again, and Satan went from them, and seeing he could not prevail over them, and he transformed himself into a large brook of the water in the road. And when Abraham, Isaac, and the two young men reached that place, they saw the brook large and powerful as the mighty water. And they entered the brook, trying to pass it. And the further they went, the deeper the brook, so that the water reached up to their necks. And they were all terrified on the account of the water. But Abraham recognized this place, and he knew that there had been no water there before. And he said to his son, I know this place on which there was no brook nor water. Now surely it is Satan who doth all this to us, to draw us inside this day from the commands of God. And Abraham rebuked Satan, saying unto him, The Lord rebuke thee, O Satan. Begone from us, for we go by the command of God. And Satan was terrified by the voice of Abraham, and he went away from them. And the place became dry land again, as it was at first. And Abraham went with Isaac towards the place that God had told them. Satan then appeared unto Sarah in the figure of an old man, and he said unto her, Where did thine husband go? She said, To his work. He just went to the factory. It's where he goes every day. And where did thy son Isaac go? He inquired further. And she answered, He went with his father to his place of study of the Torah. And Satan said, "O thou poor old woman, thy teeth will be set on edge on the account of thy son. For thou knowest not that Abraham took his son with him on the road to sacrifice him." And in this hour, Sarah's loins trembled, and all her limbs shook. And she was no more of this world. Nevertheless, she aroused herself and said, "All that God hath told Abraham, he may do unto life and unto peace." And on the third day of his journey, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place at a distance, which God had told him. He noticed upon the mountain a pillar of fire reaching from the earth to the heaven, and a heavy cloud in which the glory of God was seen. Abraham said to Isaac, "My son, dost thou see on the mountain which we perceive at a distance that which I see upon it?" And Isaac answered unto his father, "I see, and lo, a pillar of fire and a cloud, and the glory of God is seen upon the cloud." And Abraham knew that Isaac was accepted before the Lord for an offering, and asked Ishmael and Eliezer, "Do you see that which we see upon the mountain?" And they answered, "We see nothing more than like the other mountains." And Abraham knew that they were not accepted before the Lord to go with them. And Abraham said to them, "Abide ye here with that ass. You are like the ass. A little as it sees, so little do you see. I and Isaac my son go yonder to the mount and worship there before the Lord, and this eve we will return to you." An unconscious prophecy had come to Abraham, for he prophesied that he and Isaac would both return from the mountain. Eliezer and Ishmael returned at that place as Abraham had commanded, and he and Isaac went further.
Learn more at Abracast.com. Get bonus content and access to the private Abracast workgroup by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at Patreon.com or Subscribestar.com.
So the Catholics point to, 3 sacrifices that prefigure a Jesus Christ. And this sacrifice of Isaac that we're talking about tonight is the second one of these. It's actually the third chronologically, but Catholic canon puts Melchizedek's sacrifice in the third position. This dude was talked about on the show a number of times. Adam's Magic Underpants, World War Zero, and rightly so in some of those old Mason episodes if you're interested in Melchizedek. Anyways, the first, I feel like I'm opening a can of worms. The first of these sacrifices is Cain and Abel, right? The old story of Cain offering up the hard work of his talent, skill, and his hands, and Abel offering up an animal that he didn't create. He just took what God had already made and offered that up. And that's the official Abracast interpretation of that Cain and Abel story, by the way. A lot of theologians and holy men turn it into a story of jealousy and so forth. If you're interested, you can check out my latest graphic novel, The Ages. We get into it pretty deep there. I mean, you haven't lived until you're drunk, sitting in an S&M club in the middle of Seattle at 1 o'clock in the morning, debating with some dude pretending to be a vampire what the story of Cain and Abel means. And when I say pretending he's a vampire, I'm not saying that he thinks he's a vampire. Oh, jeez. I'm going to have to explain this. So when I lived in Seattle, one of my hangouts was this S&M club. We just happened to find this place one night. It was in the basement of a block of stores or something right there, kind of like on the outskirts of Pioneer Square. It was kind of facing the Kingdom, actually. It was called the Catwalk. It was one of the coolest places, even to this day, that I've ever been to. It was a complete and total fucking freak show, but in the best way possible. They would charge you, this is the kind of place they would charge you more at the door if you were wearing anything other than black, you know? So in the Catwalk, you'd walk in, and like I said, you know, everyone is wearing black. There's a lot of pleather, a lot of leather, a lot of Hot Topics gear, if you know what I'm saying. So you'd walk in and they'd have like this space. It was kind of like a dance floor as soon as you got in. And that's where the cradle would be. You're like, cradle? What? There's this massive dude in a diaper and a bonnet with like a pacifier. And he's always there hanging around in this crib. Every time I was there, this motherfucker was there. So, off to the right, they had like this back room, Bauhaus blaring. There was always like this projector playing like the 20s and 30s, like Nosferatu movie or like the Hunchback of Notre Dame against the whole side of the wall. But there was also this back room where they were whipping chicks who were hanging on cargo nets and all kinds of weird shit went on back there. Anyhow, if you went straight through the first dance floor with the crib, there was like this bar with these huge white columns and this beautiful checkerboard floors. And it had like this red kind of draping tapestry coming from the ceiling. Anyways, the whole thing looked like something out of a movie. Anyhow, I got into I'm sitting there at the bar, drunk, like I said, 1 or maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't remember. But I get into this debate or whatever with this guy who was make-believing he was a fucking vampire. So you'd see these dudes occasionally there. Nowadays it's called LARPing. Back then it was called live action role playing. Those guys actually called it the Mind's Eye Theater or something like that. It's this role-playing game. It's called Vampire the Masquerade. This was like in the midst of Anne Rice. You know what I mean? Like Vampire Lestat was out probably. It was out. You know, she's writing her like these vampire books and all this kind of stuff. You know, but you'd see them out there playing and they'd be like, brr, brr, and they'd be like, I challenge, because it's all about like politics, not like left and right, Republican, whatever, Democrat politics. It's about the politics of the group inside the game. So there was like a lot of talking and sitting around. It sounds like the most boring game. Anyhow, so I didn't know if this dude thought that I was part of his game or whatever, but because, you know, like I've played a role-playing game or two in my day. I never played a live-action role-playing game, because I'm like, you want to be dorks, fine, be dorks in your basement, okay? Stop inflicting your dorkishness on everyone in public. We're in an S&M club, we're trying to get laid, we don't want to talk to you about your fucking vampires. Anyhow, so I start talking to this dude, and for whatever reason, so in the game, I guess, Cain, the biblical or the Old Testament Cain is a vampire or some such silliness. And the dude kept calling the city that Cain lived in And I'm like, bro, you silly black number one son of a bitch. Is in Samaria. Cain built a city called Enoch. And he was like, Enoch is a person. It is not a city. And I'm like, this ignorant vampire dick face kept telling me that Enoch wasn't a city. It was a dude. And I'm like, yes, I know that it was a dude, but it was also a city. And I'm talking to this motherfucker. He's very frustrating. Anyhow, if you are listening right now to this, you vampire motherfucking piece of trash, I'm setting the record straight. Where was I? I'm way off course with this. So these sacrifices that prefigure Jesus, Cain and Abel, where Cain's offering was snubbed and Abel's offering of an animal was like blessed or whatever. So in the end, Cain and Abel. Then Abraham sacrifice. God is telling Abraham to go sacrifice his son. And once he ties this punk kid up and he actually goes to give him the old dirt nap, but this angel stops him. He's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Meanwhile, God is seriously jonesing. I don't know. Like, I picture he's like edging. Like, he's like, I just got to get it. Like, I'm so close. Oh my God. Or whatever. That he provides an animal for Abraham to sacrifice. And I'm like, the Akdah. And while they were walking along, Isaac spake to his father, Behold, the fire and the wood. But where then is the lamb for the burnt offering before the Lord? And Abraham answered Isaac, saying, The Lord hath chosen thee, my son, for a perfect burnt offering instead of the lamb. And Isaac said unto his father, I will do all that the Lord hath spoken to thee with joy and cheerfulness of my heart. And Abraham said unto Isaac his son, Is there in thy heart any thought or counsel concerning this which is not proper? Tell me, my son, I pray thee. O my son, conceal it not from me. And Isaac answered, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, there is nothing in my heart to cause me to deviate either from the right or from the left of the world that he hath spoken unto thee. Neither limb nor muscle hath moved or stirred on account of this, nor is there in my heart any thought or evil counsel concerning this, but I am joyful and cheerful of heart in this matter, and I say, Blessed is the Lord, who has this day chosen me to be a burnt offering before him. Abraham greatly rejoiced at the words of Isaac. He was like, oh yeah, great. My son's cool with me burning him for God. And they went on and came together to that place the Lord had spoken of. And Abraham approached to build the altar in that place. And Abraham did build, while Isaac handed him stones and mortar until they finished erecting the altar. And Abraham took the wood and arranged it upon the altar. And he bound Isaac to place him upon the wood which was upon the altar, to slay him for a burnt offering. For a burnt offering before the Lord. And Isaac spake hereupon, Father, make haste, bear thine arm, and bind my hand and feet securely, for I am a young man, but 37 years of age, and thou art an old man. When I behold the slaughtering knife in thy hand, I may perchance to begin to tremble at the sight and push against thee. For the desire unto life is bold. Also I may do myself an injury and make myself unfit to be sacrificed. I adjourn thee, therefore, my father, make haste and execute the will of thy Creator. Delay not. Turn up thy garment, gird thy loins. And after that thou hast slaughtered me, burn me into fine ashes, then gather the ashes and bring them to Sarah my mother, and place them in a casket in her chamber at all hours. Wherever she enters her chamber, she will remember her son Isaac and weep for him. And again Isaac spoke, As soon as thou hast slaughtered me, and hast separated thyself from me, and returnest to Sarah my mother, and she asketh thee, Where is my son Isaac? What wilt thou answer her? And what will you two do in your old age? Abraham answered and said, We know we can survive thee by a few days only. He who was our comfort before thou wast born will comfort us now and henceforth. After he laid in the wood in order and bound Isaac to the altar upon the wood, Abraham braced his arms. He rolled up his garments and leaned his knees upon Isaac with all his strength, and God, sitting upon his throne high and exalted, saw the hearts of the two were the same, and tears were rolling down from the eyes of Abraham upon Isaac, and from Isaac down upon the wood, so that it was submerged in tears. And when Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son, God spoke to the angels. Do you see how Abraham, my friend, proclaims the unity of my name in this world? And I hearkened unto you at the time of the creation of the world. And ye spake, What is man that thou art mindful of him? And the Son of Man, thou visitest him. Who would there have been to make known the unity of my name in this world? The angels then broke into loud weeping, and they exclaimed, The highways lie waste, the wayfaring man ceaseth. He hath broken the covenant. Where is the reward of Abraham, who took the wayfarers into his house and gave them food and drink, and went with them and to bring them on the way? The covenant is broken, whereof thou didst speak of him, saying, For in Isaac they shall be called. And saying, My covenant will I establish with Isaac, for the slaughtering knife is set upon his throat. The tears of the angels fell upon the knife, so that it could not cut Isaac's throat. But from terror his soul escaped him. And then God spoke to the archangel Michael and said, Why standeth thou there? Let him not be slaughtered without delay. Michael, anguish in his voice, cried out, Abraham, Abraham, lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. And Abraham made answer and said, God did command me to slaughter Isaac, and thou dost command me not to slaughter him. The words of the teacher and the words of the disciple, unto the words doth one hearken. Then Abraham heard it said, By myself I have sworn, saith the Lord, because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. Thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So it's weird, like when God's trying to convince him to kill his son, he talks directly to him. But when he's like, never mind, go tell him not to kill his son, like he sends a messenger to do it. It's just so weird. At once Abraham left off from Isaac, who returned to life, revived by the heavenly voice admonishing Abraham not to slaughter his son. Abraham loosed his bonds, and Isaac stood upon his feet and spoke the benediction. Blessed art thou, O Lord, who quickenest the dead. Then Abraham spoke to God, and he said, Shall I go hence without having offered up a sacrifice? Whereunto, okay, so God confirms. So God says, Lift up thine eyes and behold the sacrifice behind thee. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket, which God had created in the twilight of Sabbath eve. And in the week of creation and prepared, since he was a burnt offering instead of Isaac. And the ram had been running towards Abraham when Satan caught hold of him and entangled his horns in the thicket, and he might not advance to Abraham. And Abraham, seeing this, fetched him from the thicket and brought him upon the altar as an offering in the place of his son Isaac. And Abraham sprinkled the blood of the ram upon the altar and exclaimed and said, This is instead of my son, and may be considered as the blood of my son before the Lord. And whatsoever Abraham did by the altar, and exclaimed and said, This is instead of my son, and may be considered before the Lord in place of my son, the God accepted the sacrifice of the ram, and it was accounted as though it had been Isaac. As the creation of this ram had been extraordinary, so also was the use to which all its parts of his carcasses were put. Not one thing went to waste. The ashes of the parts burnt upon the altar were formed the foundation of the inner altar, whereupon the expiatory sacrifice was brought once a year on the Day of Atonement, the day on which the offering of Isaac took place. Of the sinews of the ram, David made 10 strings for his harp, upon which he played. The skin served Elijah for his girdle. And of the 2 horns, one was blown at the end of Revelations on Mount Sinai, and the other will be used to proclaim the end of the exile, and the great horn shall be blown. And they shall come, which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria, and they that were outcast in the land of Egypt, they shall worship the Lord. in the holy mountain at Jerusalem. And when God commanded the father to desist from sacrificing Isaac, Abraham said, "One man tempts another because he knoweth not what is in the heart of his neighbor. But thou surely didst know that I was ready to sacrifice my son." And God said, "It was manifest to me, I foreknew it." What thou wouldest withhold, not even thy soul from me. And Abraham said, "And why then did thou afflict me thus? It was my wish that the world shall become acquainted with thee, and should know that it is not without good reason that I have chosen thee from all the nations. Now it hath been witnessed unto the men that thou fearest God." Hereupon God opened the heavens, and Abraham heard the words, "By myself I swear." And Abraham said, "Thou swearest, and also I swear, I will not leave this altar until I have said what I have to say." God says, "Speak whatsoever thou hast to speak." And Abraham says, "Didst thou not promise me thou wouldest let one come forth out of mine own bowels to seed should fill the whole world?" "Yes." "Whom didst thou mean?" God says, "Isaac." "Abraham, didst thou not promise me to make my seed as numerous as the sands of the seashore?" "Yes." "Through which one of my children?" asked Abraham. God, "Through Isaac." Abraham says, "I might have reproached thee and said, O Lord of the world, yesterday thou didst tell me in Isaac thy seed be called, and now thou sayest, Take thy son, thine only son, even Isaac, and offer him as a burnt offering. But I refrained myself and said nothing. Thus mayest thou, when the children of Isaac commit trespasses, and because of them fall upon evil times, be mindful of the offering before their father Isaac, and forgive their sins and deliver them from their suffering. And God said, Thou hast said what thou hadst to say, and I will now say what I have to say. Thy children will sin before me in time to come, and I will sit in judgment upon them on the New Year's Day. If they desire that I should grant them pardon, they shall blow the ram's horn on that day. And I, mindful of the ram that was substituted for Isaac as a sacrifice, will forgive them for their sins. Furthermore, the Lord revealed unto Abraham that the temple to be erected on the spot of Isaac's offering would be destroyed, as the ram substituted for Isaac extradited himself from one tree but to be caught in another. So his children should pass from kingdom to kingdom, delivered from Babylonia, and would be subjugated by Media. Rescued from Media, they would be enslaved by Greece, escaped from Greece, would serve Rome, yet in the end they would be redeemed in a final redemption at the sound of the ram's horn, and when the Lord God shall blow the trumpet and shall go with whirlwinds of the south. The place on which Abraham had erected the altar was the same whereon Adam had brought his first sacrifice, and Cain and Abel had offered their gifts to God, and the same whereon Noah raised the altar of God after he left the ark, and Abraham, who knew that it was the place appointed for the temple, called it Yahweh, for it would be the abiding place of the fear of the service of God. But Hashem had given it the name Shalem, the place of peace. And God would not give offense to either Abraham or Shem. He united the two names and called the city by the name Jerusalem. After the sacrifice on Mount Moriah, Abraham returned to Beersheba, the scene of so many of his joys. Isaac was carried to paradise by angels, where he sojourned for 3 years. Thus Abraham returned home. And when Sarah beheld him, she exclaimed, "Satan spoke truth when he said that Isaac was sacrificed." And so grieved was her soul that it fled from her body. So what do you think? Do you think that we're seeing some kind of linkage there in the story of Cain and Abel, their sacrifice story? Isaac was like Cain's offering. He was something that Abraham actually made, or God, or Michael, whoever. And God passed on Isaac and took the animal, the ram that was caught in this bush. In Genesis 17:15, we clearly see that Abraham passed his blessing to Isaac, who was his second son. We will see later what happens to Isaac. He actually has two sons, the eldest Esau and the younger Jacob. And at the beginning, Esau is like this burly hunter, and Jacob he's sort of like how I imagine Cain was. He's kind of like a mama's boy. And in that story, Jacob, the wrong brother, gets the blessing. And there is a sacrifice of sorts of an animal that kicks off the chain of events. So what happens is Isaac, who is the dad, was like blind and elderly. He was like old, and he's like, "Esau, why don't you go get me some deer meat?" And that's what starts this whole fucking chain of events between Esau and Jacob. And that actually leads to one of my favorite Bible stories, by the way. I can't wait to get to it. Anyhow, like I said earlier, this is just something I noticed. It's just something I thought it was worth mentioning because I'm kind of hot on the trail of this. I wanted to mention it so we can kind of keep track of where we're going as we're getting through this book. So,
thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.